here we are, Talbot Street.
Everybody's come through the doors of this building, haven't they? And all sorts of things.
Yeah, they've come through for complaints, confessions to murder, and of course Jerry Hutch snuck in this building as well late at night one night and did an interview.
And flowers.
And flowers.
Don't forget the flowers, because we're going to tell all these stories at the Cork Podcast Festival, which is our show's actually on the 30th of March in the Opera House. Tickets are on sale from the corkpodcastfestival.ie, and they're selling fast. We've only got, 2 weeks left?
2 weeks left, yeah.
Eamon, this is one of these stories that absolutely goes for me, because what we have is a criminal who's making money from the backs of women who are working in the sex industry, but he's also claiming an enormous amount of social welfare while he's here, as if he doesn't have enough. A guy called Ioan Anton, who we spoke about for years, really, before he was ever really kind of come into the public eye.
Yeah, I mean, he was this kind of shadowy gangland figure, as is our nature in the Sunday world. Like, you're always looking for the next Mr. Big that you want to be the first to expose. And like, I know ourselves and different colleagues would each separately get our own tips. So you got to look at this guy or that guy. And I know that there was an address out somewhere in West Dublin where he'd been living, or supposed to have been living at one stage, and apparently missed him by just moments of getting the first picture of the shadowy Eastern European gang leader. That was, I'd say, close to 15, if not 20 years ago at this stage. And look, he was never really, he wasn't in the public eye for a long, long time.
I think it's difficult enough to get intel, and you speak to guards and they will say the same thing because of the language differences and because they tend to stay within their own community. So this was a Romanian guy who a lot of the women, I think, that were being brought into the country were also from Romania. Even say, for example, with the grow houses, they will talk about there being a lot of dialects, and it's difficult even when they have translators to try and get the intel and get the information. I suppose the Romanian firstly, the sex trade is a notoriously quiet, scared population of people who don't often come to the media with stories. I mean, they rarely end up with the Gardaí or with these sort of charities that sometimes rescue them, because their situations are so complex.
Yeah, and it's horribly grim, to be honest. And I think there's kind of a bit of a blind eye is sometimes turned to it. Do we really want to get into this? And it is a topic that, the Sunday world has gone out over the years and very much evolved in the way it's been covered. And that you're looking at the sort of the criminal gangs, the organised criminal gangs who are behind the vast majority of this trade. And like in Anton's case, he was dragged into the light in 2012 as I think it was RT's primetime. Well, not that I think it was RT's primetime. They exposed him. They did a fantastic job. I think they were able to spend 6 or 9 months or something watching these various brothels, because the women were being moved, and they could see a pattern. I think they mirrored the Escorts Ireland website to see when, what days certain brothels would change around the women. So they were able to watch, and they were able to pick up, the women being collected and brought to the next brothel. And this is where they got Ioan Anton on film. And they caught him a couple of times on film, and they tried to doorstep him. And, and he obviously denied everything. And following that expose, I mean, it was. Had
he any criminal convictions at that point?
Nothing that we were able to really to get stuck into.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was after that there was other bits and pieces came up, but at that stage, no. And he's the Department of Social Welfare on the back of the RT expose decided then they were going to cut off his social welfare. And they made that decision, I think, the following year in 2013. And he actually went to court looking for his money back, or looking to have his payments restored, making the argument that, he had to borrow from friends and he was very poor, and all these allegations in RTE were completely wrong, and that he denied he's being involved in crime. But now we have the evidence from the recent cab case, which he didn't contest, was that just from rent alone, he was making €750,000 a year. Right. And these are properties that he had leased and then would have been sublet to other, prostitution gangs connected to his network. And so he was also getting, on top of that, he would have been getting a cut of the fees of whatever the women earned or whatever was generated from them, selling sexual services. And there was a raid on one of his associates' apartments, and they found documents to show that there was at least 19 different addresses connected to them. And
all running in tandem.
Not necessarily all in tandem, but they were able to verify with guards on the ground in the different towns. So you're talking about all over Ireland and Dublin, and they were able to say, that is an active brothel. And that one was being used until quite recently. So it gives you an idea of the scale. That if you consider there's probably 2 to 3 women in each of those. So you're talking like between 50 or 60 women, which we previously estimated are generating often, 5,000 to 8,500 or, that kind of money a week. So you're talking 300,000 to 350,000, 350k a week being earned by this single Romanian gang based in Ireland, and then he goes back looking for his dole money to be restored.
Was the money being? How was he getting it out of the country, or was he sending it back to Romania?
None of that really came up. I mean, the cab case was actually a 2016 case.
Yeah.
And it came to light again because the time had lapsed, and there was $5,500 left in a bank account. That was what was left over from the sale of a BMW X5 that he had been driving and was seized off him at one stage, and he'd been stopped in it a number of times. So that's all they got, essentially, which is sad in one way. But at the same time, then, we got an insight into how they operated. And, it was quite a... it was a massive operation. And
explain to people why they move around, because if you were to look at the websites that are advertising these services, it's almost this sort of, the woman is supposed to be excited about kind of coming to your town and we'll be in such and such a place in, Longford or in Cavan or something next week. But it's not a touring, it's not a good fun tour. They're moved for different reasons. Yeah,
I mean, no, altruism doesn't come into it, let's say. I mean, they're not doing it for anything except to make money. And it's a use of coercive tool. I mean, if somebody's been moved around from place to place in a country where they don't speak their language, it's hard to figure out, how am I going to get away with this? How am I going to get out of here? You're not going to form a relationship with a customer who might suddenly realise, I feel sorry for this lady. She's clearly been trafficked. I'm going to call the guards, or I'm going to help her escape. And then on top of that, then, there is the other idea that, it's demanded by the punters, the regulars who go to brothels, don't want to be going to the same sad-looking ladies or not so sad ladies or whatever. They want, they want to they want something different, and so this is kind of I suppose the thinking behind it.
So what's Ioan Anton's background like? Where does he come from? How does he end up in Ireland?
He's been here for well over 20 years. And, like stories, different times when he was giving information to the guards about, when he'd been stopped, that he had, for instance, he was in construction. I think another story was that he had car washes, that he worked in the car wash business. These ones where people go up and a group of guys clean your car, and, they're quite popular. And that he had, one of these in the south and another north of the border as well. And that, he was a legitimate businessman, but they have him for he was involved in basically intimidation, extortion, prostitution. And as well as that, then he was involved in an ATM robbery, which he actually did end up serving time for. They used gas canisters to blow up an ATM machine in Hamilton in Northern Ireland. And he got a 1-year sentence for that. I think one of the guys he was with got a slightly stronger sentence. So he spent some time in prison for that. But apart from that, it was all minor convictions. I think he might have had a minor assault conviction over some kid threw a snowball at him in Balbriggan, where he'd been living with his wife. And that was the address then that we know he's been using.
So what's his relationship to, and explain who this Cornelius Kaiser is? Because he was really, the mysterious...
That was another name, like Ioan Anton, we'd heard about, and Cornelius Kaiser was a name that we're hearing from, contacts on all sides of all fences. Yeah. He was known, and at one point you weren't sure, was Cornelius Kaiser a title or an actual person, but he is a person.
I think we used to call him Kaiser Soze because we'd never really quite worked out
and it was all that kind of, and I think he came up in, one of our colleagues at the time did an investigation about a guy who had done a load of fake mortgage applications.
And he came up in that,
His name came up in that. And
He was supposed to be operating at one stage around O'Connell Street, wasn't he? In a premises around there, and difficult to watch, and
just
you
off
could never
Marlborough
work out
Street,
which one he
between
was.
Marlborough Street and that neck of the woods. And when we stopped a few times, and there did seem to be a trail of people that were fitting the bill of, he looks like an Eastern European gangster walking in and out. So this guy, like Ioan Anton took over from him, and basically inherited the whole network. And I mean, the kind of the affidavit evidence from one of the guards was that he was that Anton would have been a close associate of a prolific criminal known as Cornelius Kaiser, who was formerly the head of this Romanian organised crime group operating in Ireland. And then he left Ireland and went to Abu Dhabi, and that Anton took over full control. But since then, this would have been an affidavit sworn before then. He was actually ended up back in Ireland, and he got time for
Anton or Cornelius Kaiser.
Cornelius Kaiser got for basically taking out fake loans or bogus loans, or a bogus company being used to take out loans on large pieces of machinery, and that he was also connected to a similar scam in Romania, which are stolen plant hire, big piece of equipment like trucks were being kind of recloned and being sold abroad. So he was part of that. He did time here. I do remember actually getting a query from someone in the prison service saying, "Have you heard of this guy's Cornelius Kaiser?" And I'd say, "Yes, we have." "Why?" And he says, "Who is he?" Because they were concerned about the deference he was being shown by other prisoners, and hadn't well, the people I was talking to, the level they were at, didn't have any intel, and thought, well, let's see if the Sunday world knows who he is.
And where is he now?
I don't know. I presume he's back in Dubai.
He could be.
I think we would hear if he was back in Ireland at this stage. I know we dug up pictures of him at one point, and he was in Dubai. So I suggest that he's possibly there. I mean, it seems to be the go-to place for all these high-level organised criminals.
What about Ioan Anton?
Ioan Anton is back in his home place, which isn't too far from the Moldovan border, and he's under house arrest at the minute now. So he would have done a bit of fighting here, in a sense, fighting court battles, that is, and in 2022 was trying to avoid being extradited back, which is
for what criminal?
For now, this is, you have to wrap your head around this now.
Okay.
So he's due to go on trial, or he's facing charges over the murder of another Romanian national, Virgil Busa, who was described as being a pimp involved in Ireland. He was a rival. And basically, Ioan Anton is accused of organising this man's an attack in which he basically died. He was beaten to death, having jumped from a balcony of an apartment block in Navan.
Right.
But everybody involved were Romanians, and everybody involved was back in Romania. So the trial is going on in Romania. So there's been quite a number of people already imprisoned or convicted over this. So he was extradited back from Ireland, and again, a lot of this stuff was re-litigated or re-mentioned in court about his past. Again, he denied all this as he fought the extradition case, but he ended up losing and was sent back. And there was footage of him being brought in to the airport in when he arrived back in his native country, and he was handcuffed and surrounded by guys in SWAT gear and tactical gear and under very heavy security at the same time, with a media scrum surrounding him as well. And it was in.
What was that, for the sake of the EU, or was that because he was such a big name over in Romania?
He's obviously a big name in Romania. I mean, you're not going to get that in a place like Romania unless it's a big name. And I suppose they're making the point that, look, we're even taking on someone of his stature. So obviously he's well known in Romania for the same reasons he's known here. But it turns out then in the most recent stuff then that's come up in the Criminal Assets Bureau, which is to get this $5,500 or thereabouts back from the sale. So this all turned up again, and it was mentioned, they were going through all this stuff about, serving legal notice and all the rest. And it was mentioned now he's now under house arrest. So he's, despite all this security, he's now in house arrest, and the address was there. It's a nice looking.
So were the Tate brothers?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you do wonder, is there a bit of performative policing going on when these guys are being arrested by fellas in SWAT teams?
Well, I think Trump knew who his voters were, so he sort of he claims he knew nothing about the Tate brothers returning to the States, but nonetheless, they were very quickly returned. And I think Romania say they're still facing charges and they will be brought back at some point. But does anyone believe
it did seem to be dragging on. And I mean, even, there's no, last time I checked a couple of days ago, there's no move as far as I can see on Ioan Anton's case as well. So whether or not it'll fall apart or go ahead. Well, he was extradited back in 22. So, I mean, you're getting into now the third year since he's been sent back from Ireland.
Yeah. And what happened, the network here, do you know? Did it get passed to another?
Well, I mentioned, I presume it has, or another associate. I mean, like there were other members of the gang based in Ireland, and not all of them were done for murder in Romania, and some of them got lesser sentences. I mean, it's too big a money pot for people to walk away from. So, I mean, and I know for a fact that there's somebody I know who has been able to study Escort Ireland and the way it works, and still refers to like the 6 or 7 or 8 big gangs, and still refers to them as one of them, as Ioan Anton's group.
Right.
So whether Ioan has any, benefit from this, the organization that he was controlling still exists and is still moving women around from town to town on a weekly basis. And there's still people going in and paying for sex with women who are essentially trafficked into this country.
It feels like there's very little kind of police activity around it all.
Yeah, again, I mean, every so often, I mean, they changed the legislation, and I think there was 1 or 2 cases where the men were prosecuted for being for purchasing sex, I think, basically because they admitted they had done so, not realizing that now was illegal to do so. Look, it's an entrenched issue, and it's kind of, and there's arguments on both sides, let's say, of the argument that some people are saying it's a woman's choice if they want to work, or it's a person's choice to sell their body, which, in theory works fine. In reality, the only people who are making money out of the sex trade are maybe, there's a 0.1% of these, like, seriously well organized, beautiful sex workers of whatever gender they are able to make a lot of money and keep the money.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, the only people making money off of them are organised criminal gangs.
And that seems to be the only place that you would be bothered putting funding into for policing, like into the organised crime groups behind it. I don't think anybody would agree that you'd police the women or the punters that are using them, perhaps. Well, that is a crime, obviously, to do that now. But, I mean, in general, it's these organised groupings that are moving women into the country, that are moving them around. And while we get very little stories out of that world, those that we've had out of that world are horrific. They're women being paid in condoms, sometimes not being paid at all, being made to work for 10, 12 hours a day, and being moved from place to place in a bid to sort of blindside them, that they can't make friends, connections, or community, that they don't know where they are, their passports are taken. All those issues that's massive organised crime. We had a Europol report recently that we were reading from, and it is, listed as one of the kind of the threats to Europe, as an organised crime means of making money, that it is huge, people trafficking, and it's getting bigger as things change in different countries. But it feels as if there isn't I suppose there's no voices coming out of victims calling for change or calling for investigation because they're so terrified within it. They're sort of the forgotten.
Yeah, there are a couple of notable women in Ireland, like who have been campaigning, who Irish women who had, through whatever reasons, got involved in prostitution at a much younger age, and who have been quite vocal and supporting the so-called, what's known as the Nordic model, which is criminalising the buyers and decriminalising the women, but not legalising the sex trade. I mean, like studies apparently show that in the likes of Germany, where it was legalised, that it expanded the trade. And if anything, it basically, the women who ended up going into this now legal trade, were women being trafficked from, poorer countries, and people controlling that were organised crime, and it has the opposite effect of removing the moral hazard. So men who might have previously said, geez, I'm not going to go near a brothel, it's illegal, it's immoral, it's wrong. And then you're told, well, actually, no, the law has changed, you're allowed to do it now. So a certain proportion will say, well, look, that's my conscience has now been eased. This is all legal. It's a licensed brothel. What could possibly go wrong? It's very hard to close that box once it's opened. Once that Pandora's box is opened, it's very hard to put everything back in again. So even if you try and reverse the law, that moral hazard is gone, certainly for a generation of people.
Right. Well, listen, Ioan Anton, if his trial ever comes up, I'm sure you're going to be taking a trip to Romania, yeah?
We'll have to discuss that, and exactly, how we'll organise that, Nicola.
It's lovely. Thanks, Eamon.
It's always a pleasure, Nicola.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.